Marcus woke at 4:47 a.m. to the sound of his phone buzzing against the nightstand. Sarah stirred beside him but didn't wake. After 23 years of marriage, she'd learned to sleep through his occasional middle-of-the-night work calls. The caller ID showed City Hall, Maine. Chen. His voice was rough with sleep. Marcus, it's Janet Rodriguez. The voice belonged to his former colleague from the auditor's office, now the interim director after his forced retirement. We need to talk. Marcus slipped out of bed and padded to his office, closing the door softly behind him. It's not even 5 in the morning, Janet. I know what time it is. I also know you filed a fraud report yesterday targeting Meridian Development. Her voice carried the strain of someone who'd been up all night fielding angry phone calls. My office has been getting pressure since 6 p.m. last night to bury this thing. Pressure from who? Take your pick. The mayor's office, the planning commission, 3 city council members, and Victoria Ashford herself called my personal cell. At midnight. Janet's laugh held no humor. She was very interested in discussing your harassment of her company and your history of departmental conflicts. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. His history of departmental conflicts was code for the Parks Department investigation that had ultimately cost him his job. He'd uncovered 4 years of phantom contracting schemes that funneled millions in taxpayer money to shell companies owned by the parks director's brother-in-law. The investigation had been thorough, documented, and absolutely airtight. It had also been buried by the city attorney's office after the parks director threatened to expose decades of similar arrangements across multiple departments. Marcus had been offered early retirement as a compromise, keep quiet about the systemic corruption, and leave with his pension intact. What did you tell her? I told her that fraud reports are public record and that any citizen has the right to file one. Janet paused. But Marcus, she knew details about your retirement that aren't in any personnel files. She knew about the Parks Department thing, about the pressure from upstairs, about the choice you made to walk away quietly. Marcus opened his laptop, the screen's blue glow illuminating the stacks of printed documents he'd been reviewing until nearly midnight. Which means either she has sources inside City Hall, or someone's been feeding her information. Or both. The concern in Janet's voice was unmistakable. Marcus, I've worked with you for 12 years. I know when you're onto something real. But I also know that certain people in this city have long memories and short patience for former auditors who won't stay retired. Through his office window, Marcus could see the first hint of dawn touching the construction site next door. The work area was empty except for security lights and a chain-link fence that hadn't been there yesterday, effectively cutting off vehicle access to 3 neighboring houses, including his own. Janet, I need you to run a background check on Eco Green Consulting for me. I can't do that. You're not an employee anymore, and then do it as part of your own investigation. Marcus pulled up the environmental assessment documents. Because if my preliminary analysis is correct, the city approved building permits based on a fraudulent environmental study conducted by a company that didn't exist when they claimed to do the work. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus thought the call had dropped. How fraudulent? Janet asked finally. They claimed to have completed soil contamination testing on March 15th. The company wasn't incorporated until March 22nd. Marcus scrolled through incorporation documents. The registered address is a UPS store mailbox, and their supposed environmental scientist, Dr. Patricia Hendricks, doesn't exist in any state licensing database. Jesus Christ, Marcus. It gets worse. The environmental assessment cleared. The site for construction, despite the fact that it sits directly over a documented brownfield from the old Murphy manufacturing plant. City records from 1987 show soil contamination from industrial solvents that should have required extensive remediation. Marcus heard Janet typing rapidly on her keyboard. I'm looking at the Murphy manufacturing file now. The EPA classified this site as requiring monitored cleanup in 1989. There should be quarterly soil testing reports through. Marcus, the monitoring stopped in 2003. Stopped how? Just stopped. No final clearance, no completion documentation. The file just ends. Janet's voice was tight with the professional anger of an auditor discovering sloppy record keeping, which means either someone failed to file required documentation for 22 years, or someone made the problem disappear on paper. without actually solving it. Marcus felt the familiar electricity of a major discovery. Janet, who owned the Murphy manufacturing property after the company went bankrupt. More typing. Transferred to, oh, you're going to love this. Transferred to Bridgeport Holdings in 2003. The same year the EPA monitoring stopped. Marcus was already searching business records for Bridgeport Holdings. And who owns Bridgeport Holdings? It's a subsidiary of. Janet's voice trailed off. Marcus, Bridgeport Holdings is owned by Ashford Enterprises, Victoria Ashford's family company. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Victoria Ashford's family had owned the contaminated land for 20 years, avoiding millions in EPA cleanup costs by simply making the monitoring reports disappear. Now they were using Meridian development to build luxury condominiums on top of industrial contamination that could cause cancer, birth defects, and God knew what other health problems for future residents. Janet, we need to contact the EPA. Immediately. We need to be very, very careful, Janet corrected. If we are right about this, we are talking about a conspiracy that involves environmental fraud, municipal corruption, and potentially criminal negligence that could affect hundreds of families. The kind of case that destroys careers if you can't prove every single detail. Marcus's phone chimed with a text message. This time it wasn't from Victoria Ashford. It was from an unknown number with a photo attachment. The image showed him and Sarah leaving their house yesterday morning, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. A second message arrived. Beautiful morning for a walk. Would hate for anything to happen to such a lovely couple. Marcus, you still there? Janet, they're threatening us now. He forwarded the messages to her phone. Professional surveillance. Implied threats against Sarah. This isn't just about fraud anymore. I'm calling the police. No. Marcus was surprised by the firmness in his own voice. Police reports create paper trails that Ashford can access through her City Hall contacts. We need to gather more evidence first. Marcus, if they're threatening you, then we know we are close to something they're desperate to hide. He pulled up property records for the entire Meridian Heights project area. Janet, I need you to run title searches on every property they've acquired. I want to know when they bought them, for how much, and who the sellers were. That's going to take hours. Then we'd better get started. Marcus spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing property sales, construction permits, and environmental records while Janet worked her contacts in the assessor's office. By 7 a.m., a pattern had emerged that was even more damning than he'd initially suspected. Sarah appeared in his office doorway with 2 cups of coffee and the worried expression she'd worn during the worst days of his Parks Department investigation. How bad is it? Remember the Hendersons? The elderly couple who sold their house to Meridian 6 months ago. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. They were paid $300,000 for a property assessed at $450,000. That doesn't make sense. Why would they accept so little? Because Meridian had their property declared a public nuisance due to environmental concerns. Code violations that mysteriously appeared right after they refused the first buyout offer. Marcus pulled up the violation notices. Suddenly their foundation was structurally unsound, their septic system was contaminating groundwater, and their electrical system was a fire hazard. All problems that had never existed in 60 years of city inspections. Sarah sank into the chair beside his desk. They manufactured reasons to force the sale. It's worse than that. Look at this. Marcus showed her a spreadsheet Janet had compiled. 12 properties acquired by Meridian in the past 18 months. 9 of them were forced sales after sudden code violations. The other 3 sold immediately after the owners received anonymous tips about environmental contamination that would make their properties worthless. That's not legal. It's not just illegal, it's a systematic conspiracy to defraud homeowners and circumvent environmental protection laws. Marcus's phone rang. Janet's name appeared on the screen. Tell me you found something good, he answered. I found something terrifying. Janet's voice was strained. Marcus, I just got off the phone with my contact at the EPA. The Murphy manufacturing cleanup file isn't just incomplete, it's been sealed under executive order, classified for national security reasons. A brownfield cleanup is classified for national security. That's what they told her. But here's the interesting part. The classification order was signed in 2003. The same year, Bridgeport Holdings took over the property and the monitoring stopped. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Marcus watched from his darkened office window as Sarah's car disappeared around the corner, heading toward her sister's house 20 miles across town. The relief he felt at knowing she was safe was immediately overwhelmed by the isolation of facing Victoria Ashford's conspiracy alone. The construction site next door had transformed into something resembling a military encampment, with portable generators powering banks of floodlights that turned night into harsh, artificial day. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, "Made it safely. Don't do anything stupid." Another text, from an unknown number, "Smart move. Now let's talk like civilized adults." Marcus wasn't surprised when Victoria Ashford's black Mercedes pulled into his driveway 15 minutes later. She emerged alone this time, though he could see the silhouettes of at least 2 other figures in the vehicle. Her confident stride across his front lawn suggested someone who believed she held all the cards. The doorbell rang once, followed by polite knocking. "Mr. Chen." Victoria's voice carried its familiar honey-over-steel tone. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Marcus opened the door but didn't invite her inside. Up close, he could see the strain around her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from managing a complex operation under pressure. "Ms. Ashford, working late tonight. Time is money in development, as I mentioned before." She glanced meaningfully at the construction lights illuminating his yard. "Though I suspect you've been putting your evening to productive use as well. Research can be fascinating, especially when you know where to look." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I imagine 15 years as a municipal auditor taught you all sorts of interesting research techniques, which is why I'm here to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our misunderstanding." "I wasn't aware we had a misunderstanding." "Oh, but we do." Victoria pulled a tablet from her purse and swiped to display what appeared to be a legal document. "You seem to believe that my company has engaged in some sort of fraudulent activity. That's a very serious accusation that could damage our reputation and cost us millions in delayed construction." Marcus studied the document on her screen. It appeared to be a cease and desist order demanding that he stop making false and defamatory statements about Meridian development. "On the other hand," Victoria continued, "I believe you're a dedicated former public servant who has perhaps misinterpreted some complex regulatory filings. An honest mistake that could be easily corrected with the right clarification." "What kind of clarification?" Victoria swiped to another document. A simple affidavit stating that you've reviewed the relevant permits and environmental assessments, and found them to be in full compliance with all applicable regulations. In return, Meridian Development would be prepared to increase our offer for your property to $1.5 million. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "You want me to sign a false statement saying your fraudulent environmental assessment is legitimate. I want you to sign an accurate statement saying that all proper procedures have been followed." Victoria's voice hardened slightly. "Because they have been followed, Mr. Chen. Perhaps not in ways that someone outside the development industry would immediately understand, but all our permits are legally valid and properly executed. Even the ones based on environmental assessments conducted by companies that didn't exist." Victoria's smile became predatory. EcoGreen Consulting was incorporated on March 22nd. Their preliminary site assessment was conducted on March 15th through 20th, with formal documentation completed and filed on March 23rd. All perfectly legal and properly sequenced. Marcus stared at her. "You're saying they conducted the assessment before the company officially existed." "I'm saying that experienced environmental consultants often begin preliminary work while incorporation paperwork is being processed. Dr. Patricia Hendricks has been conducting environmental assessments for over 15 years, regardless of which corporate entity she's working through at any given time. Dr. Patricia Hendricks doesn't exist in any state licensing database. She's licensed in Delaware under her married name, Patricia Hendricks Morrison, which you would have discovered if you'd been more thorough in your research." Victoria's tone suggested she was explaining something obvious to a child. Marcus felt his certainty waver. Was it possible he'd missed something? Had his eagerness to find fraud led him to misinterpret legitimate but unusual business practices? What about the Murphy manufacturing contamination? He asked. What contamination? Victoria's expression was genuinely puzzled. The EPA conducted a comprehensive site assessment in 1987 and found some minor soil irregularities that were fully remediated by 1989. The monitoring program continued through 2003 to ensure long-term stability, at which point the site received full environmental clearance. She swiped to another document on her tablet, an official-looking EPA clearance certificate dated December 2003, declaring the former Murphy manufacturing site fully remediated and suitable for residential development. Marcus's phone buzzed. With an incoming call, Janet Rodriguez's name appeared on the screen. "Excuse me," he said, stepping back from the door. "Marcus." Janet's voice was strained but urgent. "I need to tell you something important." "Are you all right? I heard you were detained." "I'm fine. Just questioned about unauthorized database access." "But Marcus, I found something." Janet was speaking quickly, quietly. "My contact at State Environmental came through. The original Murphy manufacturing contamination was worse than we thought. Industrial solvents, heavy metals, even some low-level radioactive materials from electronics manufacturing." Marcus felt relief flood through him. His instincts had been correct. "But here's the thing," Janet continued. "The contamination was fully remediated. Took 4 years and cost over $12 million, but the EPA clearance is legitimate. The site really is clean." Marcus's relief evaporated. "That can't be right." "It is right. I have the complete file. Soil samples, groundwater testing, air quality monitoring, everything checks out. Ashford Enterprises spent a fortune cleaning up that site properly." Victoria was watching him with the patience of someone who already knew what he was hearing. "Janet, what about the forced property sales? The manufactured code violations?" "I checked those too. The Henderson property really did have foundation. Problems. The inspector's report includes photographs of structural damage. The septic system was leaking into groundwater. The electrical system was 60 years old and completely ungrounded." Janet sighed. "Marcus, I think we might have been wrong about this." Marcus ended the call with shaking hands. Victoria stepped closer, her expression softening to something approaching sympathy. "Mr. Chen, I understand how this looks from the outside. Large development company, pressure tactics, elderly residents forced to sell their homes. It creates a narrative that's easy to believe." Her voice was gentle now, reasonable. "But the truth is that urban renewal is messy, complicated, and often heartbreaking. We are not villains. We are trying to revitalize a neighborhood that's been declining for decades." Marcus looked past her. At the construction site where workers were setting up equipment for what appeared to be around-the-clock operations. Then why the threats? Why the surveillance? What threats? Victoria seemed genuinely confused. "Mr. Chen, we've made you multiple generous offers to purchase your property. When you declined, we explained the legal realities of eminent domain. That's not a threat. That's information you need to make an informed decision. The photographs of me and my wife. The messages saying consequences you can't imagine." Victoria frowned and pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "I never sent any photographs or threatening messages. My communications with you have been entirely professional." She showed him her phone. "These are the only messages I've sent you." The message history showed only the texts about offers expiring and business negotiations. Nothing threatening, nothing about photographs or consequences. "Mr. Chen, is it possible someone else has been contacting you? Someone pretending to represent our company?" Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Either Victoria Ashford was an extraordinarily skilled liar, or someone else was playing a much deeper game. Who else would have reason to threaten us? "I don't know, but I think we should find out." Victoria's concern appeared genuine. "May I see the threatening messages you received?" Marcus hesitated, then showed her his phone. Victoria examined the messages, her frown deepening. "These aren't from any number associated with Meridian Development." She pulled out a business card and handed it to him. "This is our head of security, Tom Bradley, former FBI. If someone is threatening you and claiming to represent our company, he needs to know about it immediately." Marcus studied the card. Everything about this conversation was undermining his certainty about Victoria Ashford and Meridian development. The environmental clearance was legitimate. The property violations were real. The threatening messages weren't from her. But something still felt wrong. Ms. Ashford, if everything is legitimate, why did you research my background? Why mention the Parks Department investigation? Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. Because I was frustrated and trying to understand why. Marcus was standing at his kitchen window when Sarah's headlights swept across the driveway at 11:47 p.m. Relief flooded through him as he watched her park behind Tom Bradley's security vehicle, but it was immediately replaced by fear. Richard Kowalski had spent 5 years planning this revenge, and Sarah's return put her directly in the crosshairs of a man who had already demonstrated his willingness to destroy innocent lives. Sarah burst through the front door with the determined energy of someone who had spent the drive home working herself into a state of righteous fury. I don't care how dangerous it is, she announced before Marcus could speak. 23 years of marriage means we face this together. Tom Bradley appeared behind her, his expression grim. Mrs. Chen, I tried to convince her to stay at her sister's house. You don't know my wife very well, Marcus said. Sarah, what did you tell your sister? That we are dealing with a gas leak and staying in a hotel for a few days. Sarah dropped her overnight bag and moved to Marcus's side. Tom filled me in on the drive. Richard Kowalski. The revenge plot. The surveillance equipment. Her voice hardened. That bastard used his own mother's house as bait. Marcus felt a chill. What do you mean? Think about it, Sarah said. Mrs. Kowalski didn't just happen to sell to Meridian Development. Richard arranged it. He knew that watching them demolish his childhood home would trigger your protective instincts and make you suspicious of their motives. Tom Bradley nodded. We found long-range surveillance equipment hidden in the old oak tree between your properties. Professional grade, probably been there for months. Someone's been watching your daily routines, documenting your habits. Marcus walked to the window overlooking the construction site. The demolition of Mrs. Kowalski's house was nearly complete, just a pile of lumber and memories where a century-old Victorian had stood that morning. How long has he been planning this? Based on the equipment we found, at least 6 months of active surveillance, Tom said. But the planning goes back much further. The shell company that created the fake environmental assessment Incorporated. 2 years ago. The burner phones used for the threatening messages. Purchased over a 3-month period using cash and false identities. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair. He's been watching us for months, learning our routines, waiting for the perfect moment to spring his trap. Marcus's phone rang. Victoria Ashford's name appeared on the screen. Mr. Chen, thank God you're safe. Victoria's voice was tight with stress. Tom told me about Richard Kowalski and the surveillance equipment. This is far worse than we initially thought. How so? We've been reviewing our project timeline and Richard's fingerprints are all over it. The EPA file that was supposedly sealed for national security. It wasn't sealed by federal order, it was digitally altered to appear sealed. Someone with significant computer skills made it look like the environmental data was classified. Marcus felt the familiar electricity of pieces falling into place. He wanted me to believe there was a cover-up. Exactly. And the financial discrepancies in our funding structure. Those were real, but they weren't fraud, they were the result of Richard systematically sabotaging our project approvals over the past 18 months. Tom Bradley leaned forward. What kind of sabotage? Victoria's voice came through the speaker. Delayed permit applications, lost paperwork, scheduling conflicts that pushed our timeline back repeatedly. Every delay cost us money and forced us to secure additional bridge financing to cover extended construction costs. Marcus felt sick. He was driving up your project costs to make the financing look suspicious. A retired Parks Department director would know exactly how to manipulate municipal bureaucracy to create delays and cost overruns, Victoria confirmed. Richard Kowalski has been waging a two-front war, against you personally and against our company professionally. Sarah looked up from the kitchen table where she'd been taking notes. But why target Meridian Development? What did your company ever do to him? We bought his mother's property, Victoria said quietly. But more than that, our project represents exactly the kind of successful development that Richard's family contracting business could never compete for. By destroying us, he destroys the symbol of everything he lost when Marcus exposed his corruption. Marcus walked to his home office and pulled up the Parks Department investigation files he'd saved from his city auditing days. Richard Kowalski's face stared back at him from a 15-year-old personnel photo, younger then, still carrying the confidence of a man who believed his schemes would never be discovered. I remember him, Marcus said. Arrogant, entitled. Convinced that his family deserved city contracts because his father had been parks director before him. When I found evidence that his brother-in-law's company was billing for work that was never performed, Richard tried to have me fired. What happened? Tom asked. I documented everything. Phantom contracts, inflated invoices, equipment purchases that were never delivered. 4 years of systematic theft that cost taxpayers over $4 million. Marcus scrolled through the investigation summary. Richard was forced to resign, his brother-in-law went to prison, and their family construction business collapsed. Sarah joined him at the computer. You destroyed his entire world. I exposed criminal activity. There's a difference. Not to someone who spent 15 years planning revenge, Tom said grimly. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, check your email. You're going to want to see this. The email had no sender name, just a generic address that was obviously another burner account. The subject line read, the evidence you've been looking for. Marcus opened the attachment and found himself staring at a document that made his blood run cold. It appeared to be an internal Meridian Development memo discussing the deliberate concealment of environmental contamination and the bribing of city officials to expedite permits. It's fake, Victoria said immediately when Marcus read the memo aloud. Those aren't our letterheads, those aren't our internal codes, and that's not how our company communicates internally. But it looks authentic, Sarah observed. Professional formatting, technical language, specific details. Tom Bradley studied the document on Marcus's screen. This is sophisticated work. Someone with significant resources and professional document creation skills. Marcus's phone rang. The electronically distorted voice from earlier filled the kitchen through the speaker. Did you like my gift, Mr. Chen? Richard. Marcus didn't make it a question. Very good. I was beginning to think you'd lost your investigative edge. The mechanical distortion couldn't hide the satisfaction in Richard's voice. What you're looking at is just a sample. I have dozens of similar documents, internal memos, financial records, recorded conversations between Meridian executives discussing their criminal conspiracy. All fake, Marcus said. All perfectly convincing to federal prosecutors who are already suspicious of large development companies. Tomorrow morning, those documents will be anonymously delivered to the FBI, the EPA, and 3 different news organizations. Victoria's face had gone pale. He's going to destroy our company with fabricated evidence. Not just your company, Richard continued through the speaker. Mr. Chen, do you remember what happened to municipal auditors who filed false fraud reports during your career? Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. They faced federal charges for abuse of office and making false statements to law enforcement. Exactly. And when investigators discover that you've been secretly coordinating with me to fabricate evidence against Meridian Development, evidence that will be corroborated by your supposed retirement grudge against the city that forced you out, well, let's just say your federal pension might be the least of your concerns. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. He's going to frame you for conspiracy. The beauty of this plan, Richard said, is that everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Meridian Development faces federal investigation and criminal charges that will destroy their business. You face prosecution for corruption and conspiracy that will destroy your reputation and your freedom. And I get to watch both of you burn for the losses you've caused me. Tom Bradley was already on his phone, speaking urgently to someone about federal contacts and emergency protocols. Richard, Marcus said, this has gone far enough. My mother died 6 months ago. The electronic distortion couldn't mask the raw pain in Richard's voice. Alone in a nursing home in Tampa, broke and forgotten because her son couldn't afford to take care of her after you destroyed his career. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of construction equipment outside. She never moved to be closer to her daughter, Marcus said quietly. She moved because I couldn't afford the property taxes after your investigation cost me everything. The house she lived in for 60 years, where she raised her children and buried my father, I had to sell it to pay legal fees. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Meridian Development bought it from the bank after foreclosure. They paid 40 cents on the dollar for a property that represented everything my family had built over 3 generations. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Richard, I'm sorry for your loss, but this isn't what? Justice. Appropriate revenge. The distortion made Richard's laugh sound inhuman. Marcus Chen destroyed my family in the Nam. Marcus and Sarah burst through their front door into chaos. Tom Bradley was shouting orders into his radio while his security team scrambled to establish a perimeter around the construction site. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but Marcus knew they wouldn't arrive in time. Richard Kowalski had spent 15 years planning this moment, and he wasn't going to let law enforcement interfere with his finale. How long do we have? Sarah asked, grabbing essential documents from Marcus's office. I don't know. Marcus was pulling up construction blueprints on his laptop, searching for gas line locations and electrical substations. But Richard knows municipal infrastructure better than anyone. If he's planning to level this site, he'll do it efficiently. Tom Bradley appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Bomb squad is 20 minutes out. Gas company is shutting off the main line, but it'll take at least 15 minutes to depressurize the system. We don't have 15 minutes, Marcus said, pointing at the blueprint on his screen. Look at this. The Murphy manufacturing site was built over a network of steam tunnels from the original 19th century industrial complex. If Richard sets charges in those tunnels, he can collapse everything from below. Sarah was stuffing Marcus's investigation files into a waterproof bag. You're talking about multiple city blocks. At minimum. Marcus saved the blueprints to a flash drive. Richard doesn't just want to destroy us, he wants to destroy the entire neighborhood where his family lived for 3 generations. Victoria. Ashford's voice crackled through Tom's radio, I'm en route with our structural engineering team. We have the original site surveys that might help locate any underground access points. Victoria, stay back, Tom warned. This isn't your responsibility. Like hell it isn't. My company is built on renovating old industrial sites. If there are underground tunnels, I know how to find them. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Tom, we need to get to that trailer before Richard finishes whatever he's setting up. Absolutely not. We wait for the bomb squad. There's no time. Marcus turned to face the security chief. Richard sent those documents to federal agencies hours ago. By the time the bomb squad clears the site and we get access to his equipment, the fake evidence will have already destroyed both our lives and Meridian's business. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Richard Kowalski is still the same arrogant man who thought he could steal from taxpayers without getting caught. Marcus pulled up the personnel file from the Parks Department. Investigation. He's methodical, but is also prideful. He wants us to know how clever he's been. Tom Bradley's radio crackled with an update from his perimeter team, movement in the trailer. Single occupant, appears to be working with electronic equipment. Marcus studied the construction site through his office window. The trailer sat in the center of the demolition area, surrounded by heavy machinery and piles of debris. Access roads had been cut off by the security perimeter, but the trailer itself was still operational. Richard was inside, putting the finishing touches on 15 years of planning. He's not going to detonate remotely, Marcus said suddenly. What makes you think that? Tom asked. Because Richard wants to watch us burn. This isn't just about revenge, it's about vindication. He needs to see our faces when we realize how thoroughly he's beaten us. Sarah was checking her phone. The federal documents are already online. Someone leaked them to 3 different news websites. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Headlines were already appearing: federal investigation into Meridian development fraud. And a former city auditor linked to development conspiracy. The fake evidence Richard had created was spreading through social media faster than they could possibly contain it. "It's over," Victoria's voice came through the radio. "Even if we prove the documents are fabricated, the damage to our company's reputation is irreversible." "Not if we can prove Richard fabricated them," Marcus said. "Tom, I need to get into that trailer." "Marcus, no." Sarah stepped between him and the door. "If you're right about the explosives, getting close to that trailer could trigger the detonation. If I'm right about Richard, he won't detonate until he's had a chance to gloat. His ego won't let him destroy us without explaining exactly how clever he's been." Tom Bradley was studying the site layout on his tablet. "There might be a way. The old storm drainage system runs under the entire site. If we can access it from the street, we might be able to approach the trailer from below." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "Show me." Tom pulled up city infrastructure maps. "Here. Storm drain access about 2 blocks south. The main trunk line runs directly under where that trailer is positioned." That's how Richard has been moving around undetected, Sarah realized. He's been using the storm drains to access the site without being seen. Marcus was already grabbing a flashlight and the blueprint files. "Tom, give me 10 minutes in that trailer. If I can access Richard's computer, I can prove he fabricated the documents. And if he detonates while you're inside, then at least I go down fighting instead of running." Marcus looked at Sarah, knowing this might be the last time he saw her alive. 23 years ago, I made a choice to expose corruption even when it destroyed people's lives. I was right then, but I never considered the human cost of being right. Sarah took his hands. "You were doing your job. Richard chose how to respond to that. Maybe. But today I have a chance to save innocent lives instead of just auditing other people's mistakes." Marcus kissed her forehead. "If something happens to me, make sure the world knows that Meridian Development is innocent. Victoria doesn't deserve to pay for Richard's revenge." Tom Bradley handed him a radio earpiece. "You have exactly 10 minutes before we come in after you." The storm drain was exactly where the city maps indicated, though accessing it required moving a heavy iron cover that hadn't been opened in years. Marcus dropped into the tunnel system with Tom's flashlight and his laptop bag, immediately grateful for the underground construction work he'd inspected during his auditing years. The tunnels were larger than expected, clearly part of the original 19th century industrial infrastructure. Steam pipes and electrical conduits ran along the walls, and Marcus could see evidence of recent activity, footprints in the accumulated sediment, fresh tool marks on access panels. His radio crackled. "Marcus, gas company confirms the main line is shut off, but there could still be residual pressure in the local distribution system." "Understood." Marcus was following the footprints deeper into the tunnel system, his flashlight beam revealing a path that led directly toward the construction site. After 5 minutes of careful navigation, he found what he was looking for. A vertical access shaft with a steel ladder leading up to ground level. Fresh scratches on the ladder rungs confirmed that Richard had been using this route. Marcus climbed carefully, pushing against a heavy cover that opened directly into the floor of the equipment trailer. The trailer's interior was a sophisticated command center. Multiple computer monitors displayed surveillance feeds from cameras positioned around the neighborhood. Electronic equipment filled workbenches along 2 walls, and Marcus could see boxes of what appeared to be commercial demolition charges stacked in one corner. But it was the central workstation that captured his attention. Richard's computer was still logged in, displaying the document creation software he'd used to fabricate the Meridian development evidence. "Gotcha," Marcus whispered, pulling out his laptop and connecting a USB drive. "Not quite." Marcus spun around to find Richard Kowalski standing in the trailer's main entrance. 15 years had aged the former parks director badly. His hair was completely grey, deep lines etched his face, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything worth living for. "Hello, Marcus." I was wondering when you'd figure out the storm drain access. Richard. Marcus kept his voice calm, though his heart was pounding. We need to talk. Oh, we are definitely going to talk. Richard closed the trailer door and activated an electronic lock. 15 years I've been waiting for this conversation. Marcus glanced at the demolition charges, calculating distances and blast radii. You don't have to do this. Destroying the neighborhood won't bring your mother back. No, but it will give me the satisfaction of watching you die knowing that your self-righteous crusade for justice destroyed everything you tried to protect. Richard moved to the computer workstation, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. Do you know what the beautiful irony is, Marcus? Tell me. You spent your entire career following money trails to expose corruption. But you never followed the human trails to see the lives you destroyed in the process. Richard pulled up a series of photographs on one of the monitors. Marcus found himself looking at images of the Kowalski family over the years. Richard's mother at various ages, his brother-in-law's children, family gatherings in the backyard of the house that now lay in ruins outside the trailer. My brother-in-law served 8 months in federal prison, Richard said quietly. Lost his house, his marriage, his relationship with his children. Last I heard, he was living in a halfway house in Detroit, working minimum wage jobs because no contractor will hire a convicted felon. Marcus felt the weight of unintended consequences settling on his shoulder. The clipboard trembled in Marcus Chen's weathered hands as he stood in the shadow of the gleaming corporate tower, watching suited executives stride past him like he was invisible. They had no idea that the simple homeowner fighting their construction project had spent 15 years as the city's most feared budget auditor, or that their multi-million-dollar development was built on a foundation of lies he was about to expose. One signature. One phone call. One devastating audit report. Their empire was about to crumble, and they had invited their own destruction by underestimating the quiet man who refused to sell his house. Marcus Chen pressed his face against the kitchen window, watching the construction crew tear up Mrs. Kowalski's rose garden next door. The elderly woman had sold to Meridian Development 3 months ago, taking their generous offer and moving to Florida to be closer to her daughter. Now her century-old Victorian was being demolished to make way for luxury condos that would tower over his modest craftsman home like corporate vultures. The sledgehammer struck the front porch where he'd shared countless summer evenings with his late neighbor, discussing everything from local politics to a prize-winning tomatoes. Each blow felt personal. Honey, you're going to wear a hole in that glass. Sarah's voice carried from the dining room where she was grading papers. After 23 years of teaching 3rd grade, his wife had developed an uncanny ability to sense when he was spiraling into one of his obsessive moods. Marcus turned away from the window, running his hand through graying hair that had once been jet black. They started at 6 a.m. City ordinance clearly states construction can't begin before 7. Did you call the permits office? 3 times. They keep putting me on hold. He walked to the dining table where Sarah had spread out her students' math homework like a colorful paper quilt. Red ink marked corrections across addition and subtraction problems. Remember when our biggest worry was whether the Hendersons would trim their hedge? Sarah looked up from a worksheet covered in eraser marks and smudges. That was before Meridian came knocking with their briefcases and promises. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by aggressive knocking. Marcus peered through the frosted glass panels flanking their front door and saw 3 figures in expensive suits. The tallest one, a woman with platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, was checking her watch with obvious impatience. Mr. Chen. The woman's voice was honey over steel when he opened the door. I'm Victoria Ashford, Senior Vice President of Meridian Development. I believe we've spoken on the phone. Marcus recognized the voice that had dismissed his concerns about property lines and zoning variances with barely concealed condescension. Behind her stood 2 men, one young and eager with a tablet clutched against his chest, the other middle-aged with the soft look of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms rather than construction sites. Ms. Ashford. Marcus didn't invite them in. It's 7:15 on a Saturday morning. Yes, well, time is money in development. Her smile was practiced, professional, and completely hollow. This is David Park, our project manager, and Robert Gaines, our chief financial officer. We are here to make you an offer you can't refuse. The young man, David, shifted nervously. What Ms. Ashford means is we'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Marcus glanced back at Sarah, who had appeared in the hallway with a coffee mug that read "World's Best Teacher." She gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. "Come in, then." He stepped aside, noting how Victoria's calculating gaze swept across their modest living room, taking inventory of everything from the second-hand furniture to the family photos covering the mantelpiece. "Charming," Robert said, though his tone suggested the opposite. He settled onto their couch with the careful movements of someone afraid of getting his expensive suit dirty. "Very authentic." Victoria remained standing, pulling a folder from her leather portfolio. "Mr. Chen, you've been quite vocal about our Meridian Heights project. We appreciate community input, truly we do." "Community input?" Marcus let the words hang in the air. "Is that what you call my letters to the city council about your drainage plans flooding my basement?" "There seems to have been some miscommunication." "About the environmental impact studies," David offered quickly. "We are confident any minor issues can be resolved." "Minor issues?" Sarah stepped forward, her teacher's instincts triggered by obvious deception. "Our basement flooded twice last month. 40 years we've lived here, never had water problems until your crew started digging." Victoria's smile grew sharper. "Which brings us to our proposition." She opened the folder and pulled out a check, holding it up like a trophy. $1.2 million. The number hung between them like a loaded gun. Marcus felt his breath catch. Their mortgage had been paid off for 5 years, but $1.2 million represented more money than he'd see in 3 lifetimes of his modest municipal pension. "For what?" he asked, though he already knew. "Your property. We'll handle all closing costs, expedite the paperwork, and you can be relocated within 30 days. Victoria placed the check on their coffee table next to a ceramic bowl Sarah had made in a pottery class. "Meridian Heights will be the crown jewel of urban renewal. Luxury condominiums, high-end retail, a day spa. Property values in the entire neighborhood will skyrocket." Robert leaned forward, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a closer. "Mr. Chen, you worked for the city for what, 15 years? You understand how these things work. Eminent domain is always an option, but we prefer to work with residents rather than against them." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're threatening eminent domain." "Not threatening," Victoria corrected smoothly. "Simply explaining the reality of urban development. The city has already approved our master plan. Your property sits right in the middle of our Phase 2 construction. We can do this the easy way or the hard way," Marcus finished. He'd heard variations of this speech countless times during his years as a municipal auditor, watching developers pressure residents and small business owners into selling properties worth millions for fractions of their value. Sarah moved closer to him, her hand finding his arm. "We are not interested in selling." David looked genuinely surprised. With respect, this is an incredibly generous offer. Comparable properties in this neighborhood sold for half this amount just 2 years ago. "Then why do you need ours so badly?" Marcus asked. The question seemed to catch Victoria off guard for just a moment, a micro-expression of annoyance that flickered across her features before the professional mask snapped back into place. "Phase 2 construction requires continuous lot access," Robert explained. "Your property creates a significant logistical challenge. We are prepared to compensate you accordingly for the inconvenience." Marcus studied the 3 faces across from him. Victoria's predatory confidence. Robert's careful calculation. David's nervous energy. In his years auditing municipal budgets, he'd developed an instinct for when numbers didn't add up. This felt wrong in ways he couldn't quite articulate yet. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Chen, this offer expires Monday morning. After that, we'll be forced to pursue other options." "Other options meaning what exactly?" Sarah's voice carried the sharp edge she used when dealing with difficult parents. meaning we've been more than patient with community concerns. Victoria closed her portfolio with a sharp snap. The Meridian Heights project represents over $200 million in investment, jobs, tax revenue, progress. We won't allow one holdout property to derail months of planning and millions in commitments. Marcus walked them to the door, his mind racing. As Victoria brushed past him, she paused on the front step. You know, Mr. Chen, I did some research on you. 15 years as a city auditor. Forced into early retirement after that unpleasant business with the Parks Department. Contracts. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. Such a shame when dedicated public servants find themselves expendable. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Marcus watched through the window as they climbed into a black Mercedes SUV, their heads bent together in conversation. What did she say to you? Sarah asked, still holding her coffee mug like a weapon. Marcus turned away from the window, his mind already shifting into the methodical patterns that had served him well during countless budget investigations. Victoria Ashford had just made a critical error. She'd revealed that she knew about his background and, more importantly, she'd threatened him with it. She thinks I'm just a retired homeowner who'll roll over for their threats. He walked to his home office, a converted bedroom where he'd set up his computer and filing system. Sarah followed, watching as he powered up his laptop. Marcus, what are you thinking? He pulled up the city's online permit database, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. I'm thinking Victoria Ashford just reminded me that I spent 15 years learning how to follow the money. And right now, their money trail smells rotten. The Meridian Heights project permits filled his screen, dozens of documents covering everything from environmental impact to zoning variances to construction timelines. At first GL